welcome to our very first show and tell session, where we are joined by the wonderful Drew Smart from Glenfarg Community Transport Group. So we are hoping to hear from Drew all about how they went from having an idea at our Scotland conference in 2022 to now, where they're delivering a very wonderful Section 22 permit and service. So the agenda for today is, just as we've done a little welcome there, I won't ask everybody to do introductions because we've got quite a few of us. We'll obviously get Drew to introduce himself. I'll just get a little cover on what a Section 22 permit is, although I'm sure most of you will be aware of that. And then we'll have about 40 minutes, 45 minutes or so of Drew giving his presentation, and then we'll move across then for a question and answer and a bit of a general discussion. So we'll be all wrapped up for 11:30. If that's all right with everyone, just going to get my screen back again. So Section 22 permits, for anybody who doesn't know, is basically a community bus permit. So they are for bodies concerned for the social and welfare needs of their communities. They operate vehicles without a view to profit, the same as Section 19 permits, and they use vehicles to provide a community bus service. So they are local bus services carrying the general public, registered routes with the Traffic Commissioner, where they have to operate at separate fares. And only vehicles that are 9 seats or more can be used for a Section 22 permit. I'm sure everybody was more than aware of that, because I know that some of you in the room are already delivering Section 22s rather successfully. So without further ado, let's just crack on with Drew, instead of me blabbling on at you. So Drew, I'll hand over to you.
Okay, if you bear with me for a couple of minutes, because I'm usually just part of the body of the church rather than at the front. So I've never ever shared a screen before, so that'll be a challenge. But thanks very much for coming along and listening. If I just go straight to the presentation, I hope. Host disabled participant screen sharing, what does that mean?
Pass. Oh no, I've okay. I haven't made you a co-host, which would make more sense. I'm a little bit rusty, I should say. Make co-host.
Yeah, we need to go back to lockdown so we can make these things work again.
Okay, it should be you as a co-host now.
Right, okay. How do I find my share? Do I put share?
Yep.
Are you seeing that?
Yes.
Right, now I can't really actually click on there's a screen over the bit that I want to click on.
If you go to your bottom right-hand side, Drew, you can click on the presentation mode there. So just along from where you're able to minimize the screen, you're just to the left there a little bit. So there's a few icons next to the minus and plus signs, just up from your.
Can't see it.
So I suppose if you start at the thing is notes and move along from there on your bottom.
Yeah. Okay, so is it okay just to go on that screen, or
are you able to see at the very top slideshow? Can you see that on your bar?
Well, I've got a different menu along the top, mute, stop, video, and whatever.
Of course.
Which is covering the thing. See that now?
We can see that, yes.
Right. Okay. Right. If you think back to the good old days, this is basically a map of bus routes in central Scotland in about 1938, in the glory days when we had bus services which ran very frequently before the days of deregistration and whatever. And this was our bus services locally. We had an early bus service, Edinburgh to Perth, the 55, and we had the 23, which ran from Glasgow to St Andrews. Good bus services and good old days. We even had a bus service in Glenfarg, which 4 times a day the BEA bus service came through. You could get on the bus at 9:15 in Glenfarg, off the Southern House Airport, which is now Edinburgh Airport, arrive at 10:15, and by 10:05 the plane took off. So within an hour and 15 minutes from Glenfarg, you could get a bus, then an aeroplane. And those were in the days of, before all the stuff that we have now, which prevents people travelling on public transport. It made life very easy. In the sort of 80s and 90s, we had deregulation. We had bus services where the private operators cherry-picked onto the profitable routes. They became mainly daytime only for us. We saw a decrease in passenger numbers. We were told if we didn't use the bus, we'd lose it. Unprofitable bits were cut out, and that was us. And became a vicious downward cycle of decreasing bus services. And I think that's a story that was repeated all over Scotland, probably all over the UK. For us in particular, in the 5 years before 2020, the 23 and 56 went from early services to 2 early services, 3 early services. The evening services were cut out. Then the 53 and the 56 were totally withdrawn, replaced by piecemeal services, which operated bits of it. Numbers continued to decrease. Councils stepped in to provide subsidies for the bus services, which made it comfortable for some of the big bus companies to run services which didn't suit anybody other than the big bus companies. And then by April 23, we had our local coach company were operating 2 to 3 early service down to Glenfarg. They retired. The 202 replaced the 23, and we had a hodgepodge of services that really didn't work for anybody. So what did we do? 2 years ago, just now, we were in our infancy stage. We knew that we had a bus service that didn't work. We had just moved to Glenfarg, and we put down a contract for a new house on the week that the bus services were withdrawn. And we were really at the point of withdrawing because we knew that the bus service wasn't going to suit us. Worried about what would happen if my health changed so that I couldn't drive, and we could end up being very isolated, as indeed a lot of people in Glenfarg were. So 2 years ago just now, we started to do surveys. We were asking residents what they would want from a bus service, and basically started by getting charitable status. It took us 2 or 3 months, and because this, remembers, at the time of coming out of COVID, so everything was moving very slowly and very clunky and chunky. But we did actually manage to get our charitable status set up, and one of the very early things that we were told was to get membership of the Community Transport Association. And that was probably the best bit of advice that we were given, and that was from the public transport officers up in Perth and Kinross. We were also advised to go and see other community transport groups to see how they worked, and we went off to see community transport in Glasgow, 1 or 2 of the local ones in Crieff and our neighbouring villages, and saw what was happening there, and decided that we really had to have a community transport response to what was happening. At that time, it was basically to fill gaps in what we were doing. We realised that it'd be quite good to have a community bus that we could do social things, but there was no bus service in the morning and no bus service in the early afternoon. And we thought that we could probably set up our own wee bus service to cover those gaps on a very informal basis. At that stage, we applied for a Section 19 permit, and started doing small trial journeys to see how it might work on buses that were begged, borrowed and stolen from various people around the country, because it was really, really difficult to get access to a bus. We carried out various surveys. We were also told that if we were going to apply for funding, we had to be able to prove that we needed funding. We couldn't just go along and tell people we needed a bus or we needed whatever. We really had to some evidence to do that. So we had a survey of our local youth groups, and we did a residence questionnaire. We consulted at the village fete and gathered a body of evidence that showed that there was a need for local public transport, that people would use it if it was there. And we got, by the end of 2022, we had our community bus up and running. And we attended this Community Transport Association conference in 22 in Perth and got a lot of good ideas from that, made a lot of brilliant contacts. And that was probably our second boost, injection of adrenaline to get us going. And by April 2023, we had our community bus running. We had applied for permission for the 55 bus and an Arden, the school bus, and we were operational from April 23. The feedback that we got told us that we had an infrequent service, so people weren't prepared to use something that just ran every 2 or 4 hours. And with great big gaps in the morning and the afternoon, which made it difficult for people to get back if they went out for a morning run. It was an inconvenient route. The 56 bus route, which was provided with subsidy, didn't actually come through the whole of Glenfarg. It only came to the top 2 stops. So I, for example, had a 15 to 20-minute walk to get a bus, which then took 45 minutes to get to Perth. It only ran twice a day, and it left me with 3 hours to kill in Perth before I could get the bus back. There were hazard connections. You'd arrive at the park and ride, or you'd arrive in Perth 2 minutes before your bus departed, and you'd then have to wait an hour or 2 hours for the next bus. So you weren't going to use that. You either got 5 minutes in town or 3 hours in town, which again wasn't suitable. And in Perth, the onward journeys were really difficult because the connections were so awful. Kids couldn't get home other than on the school bus. There was no service for them in the afternoons. The route was fairly rigid, so that if you weren't 5 or 10 minutes within the route, you were stuffed. And it was perceived by those that had to pay to be expensive. Our new bus service, when we set up an early service between Glenfarg and Kinross initially, running from 10 past 7 in the morning until 8 o'clock at night. And at that time, we designed it so that buses we were connecting with the buses at the park and ride. 7 and 10, for example, connected brilliantly with the Ember bus into Edinburgh, and you could be in Edinburgh fairly quickly. That lasted about 3 months before the other bus companies changed their timetables, and we didn't connect with anybody again. So for the first 3 months, worked really well. Then it was awful again. And basically, it takes you about 3 months to change your timetable, and you don't want to be always changing your timetable because people get used to it and they object. The route that we set up was a flexible type route, so that although we ran mainly along a fixed route, there were areas where we could actually go off-piste and pick up people in smaller hamlets and whatever, and provide them with a bus service for the first time in their lives. And that proved to be quite popular. We've always had a 20-minute layover at the other end, so people could go down quickly for a quick turnaround if they just needed a couple of things in the town or pick up a prescription or whatever. Or you could be 1 hour, 20 minutes, 2 hours, 20 minutes or whatever. So it became quite convenient for people to use the bus. We kept our fares relatively affordable. And there's a game that's played with fares in Scotland because of the concessions, which is probably informal and it's not talked about and it's swept under the carpet. But the big companies have to make their single fares fairly toppy so that they can get a percentage of that back from the government. You're under 16s, you get 45%, you're over 60s, you get 55%, and you're 16s to 22-year-olds, you get about 85% of the single fare. So you'll find that most of the big companies have fairly high fare levels on their singles. And we've fallen into that trap as well, and that to get our concessions to that level, we've had to make our single fares fairly high. We initially had a £2 single, but it's now £2.50. But what we do is we have a multi-journey ticket. So for £10, you can get 10 journeys. So it works out as a pound a journey. And we do offers of what we call hopper fares. So if you're only jumping on for a few stops, it's just £1. And that's proven quite popular with people that have to pay. at that time, our plans for the future were to extend to Perth, to look at West Kinrossshire on the old 202 service. We looked at a wider range of destinations in Perth, and we have hopes to move to evening operation. And this is basically the Glenfarg model of transport, public transport for the village. And we basically have 5 different strands to our operations. We've got, basically it's based on the orange bus, the community bus. It's all founded on that. And we have a 55 bus service, which developed out of it. And we also have a school bus service serving the local primary schools. But we also reckon that people actually have to walk to get on the bus. They have to cycle to get on the bus. That we need good infrastructure and bus stops which are clean and safe to use. So as well as sort of working on buses, we're working on the infrastructure in Glenfarg, trying to improve that. Working on the infrastructure at the park and ride so that it becomes a place that is not just a desolate bus shelter. The bus station up in Perth, looking at how that can be improved and whatever. So we feed into that too. So it's more of a holistic transport rather than just one bus or whatever. So we're a registered charity. We're not a not-for-profit organisation. It's very much community-led, and it's there where we constantly try not to fall into the trap of designing a bus service that's great for the bus drivers and great for us. It's really has to be something that works for passengers. And the big advantage is that as well as sort of running the bus service, we are passengers. So we really need to make it designed to work for us as passengers, and then it works for everybody. Our green bus, the service bus, uses salaried and professional drivers. We get income for that bus service, so the drivers that work on that are paid. The community bus service is run by volunteer drivers when we go out on the community buses on a voluntary basis. And we don't get money for that, but what we do get is a really, really good amount of satisfaction. The things that volunteers get out of doing volunteering, we get that for the community bus. Our community bus volunteers are also our 55 bank. So when the salary drivers go off on holiday or for their lunch breaks, or if there's illness or if there are breakdowns, we have a bank of people that can step in quickly and operate the bus service. We now have, I think we've got about 22 or 23 on our books. 5 drivers are salaried, a couple of them full-time, 3 of them part-time, and others who just pick up shifts as and when. So it means that we're a relatively resilient and stable service. We've had very, very few, touch wood, incidences of services not running, and it's usually been for obvious reasons: snow or trees blocking the road, major accidents, major incidents with a bus when you get a puncture and these sort of things. But I think we would still be up to less than 10 services in the last year which have actually not run, which compared with the national, and that was initially with some fairly older buses, which probably had a higher tendency to break down, but the resilience was that we could get to something and pick things up quickly when things went wrong. And we've now moved on a wee bit in that we have relatively good buses on the services. Well, we have excellent buses on our service bus, and that makes life a lot easier for us. One of the big things that we did was we entered into a public social partnership with Perth and Kinross, which is quite it's not unique, but it's a relatively novel way of working with the council, in that they've recognised that our service is basically a service that no operator would want to operate. So they've, rather than us tendering against other companies who might put huge amounts into the tender, asking for huge amounts of money. We actually negotiate with the council as to how much it would actually cost us to run a service for a certain level. And that has worked relatively well. We have set it up so that we're not an isolated bus service trundling up and down and not making connections. We do our best to make connections, and basically that's a story of one step forward, two steps back. And hopefully in the future, with not re-regulation or whatever, but with the new Traffic Act, it may be that bus services will have to connect a wee bit better or work together across different providers. And what we've set up so that it could be replicated by any community in the country to various degrees. You could pick or choose any element of this and just pick it up and put it into another community. And as long as the community is there, prepared to put in the time, prepared to put in the people and lead it, then that's fine. It'll work in any community. I've gone backwards, that's what's wrong. So the 55 bus sections run under section 22. And that's one of our two modern, less than a year old buses, which run really well and are really fit for purpose. It took us because of the supply chain and whatever, it took us 9 months to get our first bus, and our second bus has just arrived. So that's the length of time it's taken to order buses and get them into place. But we now have two really good buses which are operating. They operate on an early service during the day between Perth and Kinross via Glenfarg. On January, we extended the service. We put in another, rather than just running between Glenfarg and Kinross, we run the whole length of the route Perth to Kinross, not on the motorway. We do it on the back road, and we're about 5 minutes slower than the motorway bus. And the importance of this one is that operates on a section 22. We're registered with the Traffic Commissioner. We've gone through all the hoops and done all the whistles and whatever, and we're registered with them. We've got a recognised route, and we can apply for concessions for the fares, and we can get what's now called Network Support Grant, or was Bus Operator Support Grant in the past. These buses have 16 seats and 1 wheelchair space, and it's dead easy to get the wheelchair on. It takes less than a minute. It doesn't cause any inconvenience to either the wheelchair user or the travelling public. And we have the only problem that we have is that we have 1 wheelchair space and we have 4 regular wheelchair users. So we really have to almost have a booking system with them, or they know that between them they have to sort things out, that the wheelchair space is available for them. But they do know that if 2 of them turn up at one time, one of them's going to only have to wait an hour. We have a backup minibus, which isn't as user-friendly as that one. It doesn't have easy access, but we make sure that wheelchair users know that we've not got a bus on for half of the day, so that we have to be careful that they come for the right bus. We run from 7 o'clock in the morning through to 6:30 at night, and the Perth runs are from 9 o'clock until 5. We still have some dynamic, flexible, wiggly areas in it, so that we can take people to the smaller communities in Duncreevy, Drunny, to the garden centre and whatever. And we have a booking service that we can use, where people who need to use that part of the service can phone up and book to be collected for that. If you're just turning up at the bus stop and want to go to these areas, you just have to ask the driver to go there. We've got 3 buses on that service: the 55 bus, KS55 bus, and PH55 bus. We have personalised numbers so that we can know which bus is on it. The other part, the part that we started with, was our community bus, which operates under a section 19. They're also 16-seat minibuses. They're not as wheelchair accessible. They have to have seats taken out and whatever to get the wheelchairs in, and it takes about half an hour to use that. So not as handy as the other bus. And it's available to community groups and individuals. We'll put on a few trips and people can book on. or individuals can suggest where the trips will go, or individuals can actually organise it. Sports groups or community groups will organise it. Top picture was one that we organised to the House of Brewer just before Christmas at the sale, and the other one's the knitting club going off to the Victoria and Albert or some whatever, to whatever. We do regular outings for Ashley House, which is a local old folks home. Every fortnight we take them out for coffee. Primary school use it, and that's been a big boon for the primary school and for the primary school budget, because we just charge them for diesel and they don't have any other charges. So what they'd be paying £100 or a couple £100 for an outing, they get for about £15. So they're regular users heading off to various sports outings, or things like Primary 7 going up to the high school for their meetings. Do theatre and concert hall trips. And again, this operates under Section 19. We can't charge fares on that, although you can get network support grant. And we do claim that, and it's a good amount of money that comes in twice a year. We've got 2 buses that operate in the community bus, GF55 bus and FG55 bus. One's a 16-seater and one's a 9-seater, 8 passengers. That's the Arngas school bus, which we have a home to school contract with Perth and Ross Council. Arngas is the small rural primary school in Glenfarg, which is about 4 classes. Again, they do regular school outings. We also do a school journey from Strathmiglo to Kinross, but that isn't a home to school service. Basically, Strathmiglo is very close to Kinross. So there are a lot of kids choose to go there rather than to the local school, which is in Cooper, but they don't get transport as a result. But what we've done is we've arranged to go through there, and that's set up as a Section 22 fully regulated service with the Traffic Commissioner, and we charge fares for that. They use their bus pass. So how are we doing? Well, we basically started with about 120 passengers a week in our first few weeks, and we'd planned over that year to double that to 250. By December, on the Glenfarg to Kinross, we were turning up to 420 passengers journeys a week. We doubled the length of the route by going up to Perth, and that has seen a huge increase in numbers, because we're now served in Kinross, Milnathorpe, Glenfarg, Bridgevere and Perth. And this was written a week ago. Actually, last week we had 942 passengers, and there's that slow increment. We hope that by the summer we'll be hitting 1,000 passenger journeys a week. But I think that what I'm trying to emphasise is we're not really about buses, and we're not about numbers. It's really the stories that are behind those buses and the numbers. You know, the people that tell us that this bus service has transformed their life. They can get out, they can get about, they get out regularly, they're meeting friends. I'm told that we just get on the bus for the banter. It's such a happy bus. They wouldn't be able to get to work if the bus wasn't there. We've avoided buying the second car, or we've sold a second. I was isolated in my own home. We were planning to move into town because we were losing our license or whatever. We were getting to that age where we couldn't drive anymore. Now they can get into town, they can get to the hospital, they can get to hospital, GP, well, if they can get a GP appointment, they can get to a GP appointment, they can get to their hospital appointments. As I say, we're quite comparably reliable, and we're inexpensive. We're still £10 for 10 journeys, and we have a lot of passengers who use that to get them around. What's not gone well for us? Well, we've actually pretty well exceeded our expectations, so there's maybe been too much that's gone wrong for us. We do find, although we think that things are moving incredibly slowly, we've had a very fast route to achieving it, but there are things that we'd like to do which we just feel, come on, just don't take 6 months to make that decision. You could make it in 2 weeks or whatever. We wanted to have a brand new spanking electric fleet, but the buses that we have are actually quite ecologically friendly. We get the higher rate of network support grant. The bus that you saw in that picture costs about 108,000, 120,000 new. A year ago they were 108,000, they're now 120,000. But the electric version of those is 240,000. So, and to take that on, it would we would the cost of running these buses would be astronomical. And the other issue is that our buses can run from morning until night, whereas the electric buses would have, instead of having 2 buses, we'd need 3. So that the range we would have to swap buses in the middle of the day. So again, that would be increased. So electric buses for us, 2 likely in the near future for the service bus. For the community bus, we would ideally like to replace them with electric buses because that would work. And we've great hopes for the Plugged In Communities Fund. We haven't been able to apply to that yet because last year when it was live, we hadn't been operational for a year. And there are lots of these sort of regulations that stop you actually doing things, which mitigated against us so that we couldn't get an electric bus last year. But we're hopeful that if there's a fund replaced this year, we'll be first in the queue. The application will be in on the first day of applications opening, and we'd love to have at least 1 electric bus in our fleet. The poor connectivity, cross-ticketing and joined-up thinking is a big issue, because if you've got a bus pass, it's brilliant. You just jump on, get on a bus, and you don't have to think too much about it. If you don't have a bus pass, it's hugely expensive to sort of get on our bus and pay a full fare, and then get on a stage bus and pay a full fare, and get into Edinburgh and get on the tram and pay a full fare. So that's not going to encourage people to use public transport. So something has to be done. I think people are working on it. There are things to get, things like the Oyster card in Scotland and whatever, but there's a huge mountain to climb on that. We're quite lucky in that we're quite close to Kinross, and on the 90 there are something like 70 to 80 buses passing through the park and ride in Kinross. The number of services now, we've got 3 or 4 buses are now going to Edinburgh or up to Kinross, up to Perth and on to various other cities. So it's actually getting, although we're not connecting deliberately, it's getting a lot easier by default to get a bus elsewhere. And I now am in the camp of using the bus as the first line, and I'll take the car if I can't get a bus to work. I don't know if you want me to say too much about Section 19 and Section 22 permits. There's plenty of stuff on the website. It's a long read, but it's relatively easy and it's very simple, explaining the difference between Section 22 and Section 19 permits. It's a bit of, if you can't sleep at night, read the Section 1922 permit stuff, but all the answers should be in there for you to find. That basically is if I can put this up at the end and you can take a picture of it, and that'll take you straight to the regulations. But it's basically, they are regulations, but the regulations, there are a whole load of exemptions to the regulations. And I'm told that it used to be very strict and they were very rigid, but we found them to be very flexible. And I think the limits of the Section 22 are stretching and they're more acceptable of it. Things like it's supposed to be a 10-mile radius, which for if it's a 10-mile radius of George Square in Glasgow, you've got a population of 1 million covered. But if it's a 10-mile radius of Glenfarg, you've got maybe about 20,000 in your radius, and all of them are at the periphery. There's only about 1,000 people in Glenfarg, and the nearest towns are 7 miles either side. So we have to stretch a wee bit, and they do allow a bigger radius for rural areas. Funding, it's a total challenge trying to fund the service. We would never be able to do it on fares alone. But we basically charge fares. We use cash and credit cards. We've got the concession cards, the under 22s, the over 60s. Most of our passengers have concession cards. We get network support grant at 0.1, 19 pence per kilometre. For most buses, it's 14 pence, but some electric buses don't even get 19 pence for some reason. But the buses we operate on the bus service get 19 pence. The buses that we operate on Section 19 get 14 pence. We get a subsidy from Perth and Kinross Council for the 55 bus and for the school bus. And we're hopefully going to pick up some subsidy from Manager Council when we move to our next iteration. We get money from charities, Smarter Choices, Smarter Places, who we met at the first Community Transport Association conference, and basically are the ones who have made us able to do what we've done. I will grovel, I will get down on my hands and knees and thank them, because we've had 2 years of funding from them, and it's made all the difference to us doing a lot of things with the bus service relatively easily, and or to what would have been a bit of a struggle to keep it going without that. There's a bit of an issue in that the government have now withdrawn Smarter Choices, Smarter Places funding, and it's gone somewhere else. It's gone back to the regional transport groups, TAC Trans, High Trans, and whatever. So that's a challenge for the future. We've had money from the lottery, Robertson Trust, Local Bank, and Bin Wind Farms, which are local wind farms. We actually own, the village owns a wind turbine up at Bin Wind Farm, but it's at the stage where we don't get any money from it. The money goes to the bank for the interest payments, but in 10 years' time, we'll be getting a lot of money for that. So that may well be a sort of income. We get lots of little funds as soon as they come up, we apply for them. Uncle Tom Copley, any grant that's going, we will put in an application for it. So quickly just nip through these next 2 or 3 slides, because that's our next stage. We're now working on the 202 replacement, having sorted the 55 leg out. And basically we're doing exactly as we've done in Glenfarg. It's the same community transport model that's been transplanted down into West Kinross-shire. So they're going to have a community bus, they'll have a bank of volunteers, they'll have a trustee on our board. And at the moment, we're going through all the public consultations, the meetings, the surveys, and whatever. And we'll be taking over the 202 on the 1st of September, because Stagecoach haven't been able to make it work. And they're quite happy to give up their contract and let us take over. The next 2 or 3 slides are just the options that we've got for folk out there that we're consulting on. One's just that a rebranded fixed bus service, which is a challenge because we're trying to put two pints into a pint pot, so that's going to be a struggle. We could move to a complete 21st century DDRT, where it's just using the bus in the foreground, small buses just running a shared service, but no fixed timetable. But what probably will be what we are doing is a semi-fixed route with some wiggly bits in it, and whatever, trying to tie in with the bus services into the Coutray so that folk can get down to Stirling and whatever. But that's what we're up to at the moment. That's what we mean by digital demand responsive transport. It's an app on your phone, various apps that you can use. We've actually got a very unusual funding from High Trans, which is the Highland organisation, who have funded with Lift and Go to provide an based service, and we're working closely with them to develop the app so that it'll hopefully work for us. And that should be able to make our services work more, to make them more flexible. We will still have a telephone answering service to back up for anybody that can't use the app. But that's one of the big areas that we're working on at the moment. And again, excuse me, that was multi-agency working. I think TAC Trans had to agree with High Trans. There was input from the Community Transport Association to make that work. And I think that funding now is through to 2020, 2027, which has saved a huge amount for us, because if we'd gone off and had to do this on our own, it would have been £20,000-30,000 just to develop an app. So that's an example of how a bigger organisation can bring benefits for smaller organisations. And what do we need for the future? Well, we just need continued support from our residents and the community support. We need continued support from the Perth and Kinross Council and the other community transport groups and associations. We need to extend our routes so that we become more efficient and whatever, and we're able to join up at least the local services. Problem is that the contracts for these services up until 2028, and unless they sort of totally muck them up like they did on the 202, they can't be withdrawn. So we'll maybe have to bide our time before we can reach our full goal. We need our volunteers. Funding, we have to move away from that. We're only funding until next year. We really need to be funded for 5 years at least. We need the recognition of the community transport and local transport. I keep saying that it needs to be mandated in the way that they do in Switzerland and Denmark, so that it's a right for local communities to have rural public transport. It's not just a postcode lottery. And we need to have that virtuous cycle, not the vicious cycle. We need our volunteer bank drivers, but most of all, we need people to use the bus. And what we've shown is that people do use the bus, and it's not just people that have to use the bus who use the bus. People use the bus out of choice now in Glenfarg. It's easier just to get on the bus and go up to Perth and not worry about parking and whatever. So our bus is really quite well used, and people need to use that for their local journeys rather than using the car. And if they can't walk or use the bike, they need to use the bus, and they only need to use the car for services that they don't need. And I think if we do that, we will save the planet. You may have seen us on the BBC a couple of times in various papers and whatever. I think this month, Douglas, this is Douglas here, on Radio 4, and they're doing a series called Cafe Hope, which is highlighting volunteers and good work around the country. So hopefully we'll be on Radio 4 in the next 3 or 4 weeks. That's what that's what Glenfarg Community Transport is all about: passengers, people on the bus, whatever. That's it. Thank you very much to all our people who've made it possible, the travelling public, whatever. And if you'd like to see, you can look at Glenfarg Community Transport on the website or on our socials. We're really quite active on Facebook. I think we're active on TikTok and Instagram as well. I don't do them, but apparently Oliver, who organises our social medias, has as much presence in them. I think we've got a YouTube channel as well. So if you Google Glenfarg Community Transport, you'll come up with some mostly positive stuff. Occasionally we get a couple of people from I don't know where who post bizarre things. We have followers in the Philippines, Sudan, Australia, wherever. Totally amazing. I don't think they'll ever use the bus, but it's good to have them on board. I'm happy to take any questions.
Brilliant. Thank you very, very much, Drew, for that. That was really fascinating. And I just can't get over how far you've come in such a short space of time. It really is absolutely phenomenal that you've taken it from, like you say, coming to our conference. I remember you coming in as well, because I'm not even sure if you were registered to book. And I remember you coming in and being, okay, so Perth and Kinross have sent me, you guys need to help us. Okay. Oh, right, where do we even start with? And in the space of, say, not even 2 years,
it's the space of a pregnancy,
yeah,
a maternity leave.
that was me, folks.
So saw you disappeared for 9 months a year, and then you came back, and hey ho. I can remember that meeting because I was just totally grumpy about we didn't have a bus, we couldn't find a bus,
Yep.
Nobody would help us. And as I say, that was the day that changed the way that we travelled, that made it possible just actually finding that, because I think you were also doing the mapping stuff at the time.
We were doing the mapping stuff at that point, yeah.
That there were actually people elsewhere who didn't have a bus. We thought that people were being nasty and picking on us.
Yeah,
because I
actually remember you said that quite a lot at that conference. Nobody's supporting us. Nobody will help us. Nobody will help us. We can't get a bus. And I guess it's that. If you keep saying it often enough, that Smarter Choices, Smarter Places were in the room, they're going, okay, nobody's helping them. Well, let's see what we can do. And as a result, you've then got funding for it. So,
and if you say it loud enough and long enough, you end up with 5 buses. So
indeed, that's a key takeaway from this in that case.